Hi, class. So today our entrepreneur of the week is Erin Parks, and she's going to tell us all about the business that she has recently started. But Erin, let's start with where are you from?
Okay, I grew up originally in Minnesota. I went to college in Chicago, and then I ended up working in DC for a while and eventually made my way to Southern California where I live now. So I live in a community called Carlsbad. It's near San Diego.
That's awesome. So, uh, growing up in Minnesota, how did you make your way to Chicago?
Yeah. Well, the fun fact, I ended up moving 2 weeks before my senior year of high school. So we moved from Minnesota to Wisconsin. It was a 5-hour drive. And it was funny because in Minnesota, everyone's like, you're moving to Wisconsin? Are you going to live on a farm? And when I get to Wisconsin, everyone's like, you're from Minnesota? Are you from a farm? I'm like, these are two identical suburbs. Like, these are just suburbs that look really interchangeable. But so I was brand new for my senior year in a suburb in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So I had to walk around with like a map my senior year of high school. So I think that made it a lot easier to leave for college. I was already did kind of the leaving of all of my friends when we moved. Um, and originally, I thought I was going to be pre-med. And so I was looking for a school where I could take all of the science classes that interested me, but also take the liberal arts classes. So I went to Northwestern, and it's on the quarter system. And that was something that really excited me.
Yeah.
That being said, I get to college and I changed my major many, many, many times. I don't know, I probably had 4 or 5 different majors by the end of it. This was 20 some years ago, so it was easier, I think, than it is now to graduate in 4 years, even when you're changing your major. And I think also the quarter system made that easier. But I was taking a lot of the science courses that I always loved, but I was really enjoying the communication courses. So learning about kind of the science of language, a lot of them are run by linguists. And they also had kind of some marketing courses. So when I graduated from school, this was when like the Enron scandal happened.
Yeah.
This was 2002. All of the recruiters that normally came to our university didn't come that year. And I actually ended up applying to all marketing jobs. And I still remember my college roommate, her name was Lauren, coming in and she's like, I don't understand why you're applying to all these marketing jobs. The only thing you ever talk about is healthcare. You wanted to be a doctor. Like, I don't understand what you're doing. And I was very annoyed at her for lecturing me. And I just kind of filed that away. So I actually ended up getting a job marketing Broadway shows while they toured. And so I was responsible for the Vagina Monologues, Rent, and Cabaret. All shows that I love. That being said, the job was horrible. I absolutely hated the job. And I remember being like, oh no, like, what if I just don't like working? And I had worked my whole life. You know, I worked at Domino's and I worked at Perkins. I don't know if you guys have Perkins down there, but it's like an Applebee's kind of. I'd always worked, but I don't know. It was miserable. It was a lot of travel. I was probably on the road 50% of the time. And I was in charge of the shows what were called like the third tier markets. So if a show goes to like Chicago, it might sit down there for 5 months, right? But like a popular show right now on tour is Book of Mormon. It might sit for 5 months in Chicago. If it comes to San Diego, it comes to San Diego for like a week.
Yeah.
If it goes to Santa Barbara, it's like 3 days. I got to be in places like Hagerstown, Maryland, where it was there for one night, right? So I was traveling to a lot of places I'd never heard of, like Hagerstown, Maryland, which was a lot of fun. But I wasn't liking my job. And so I started taking night classes in psychology, something that I hadn't taken any courses in while in undergrad. And I decided to move to DC for a boy and from Chicago. And so in preparation for that move, I sent an email to 100 different professors that were doing neuropsychology because I decided that neuropsychology interested me. And I asked all of them if they were hiring in their lab. And I'd say about half of them got back to me saying, we will always take a free volunteer. And all of it that are in college, you know, you can always find a free volunteer job in a lab. But 3 of them said they were actually hiring. And I went and I interviewed and I sold them on, well, it sounds like I shouldn't be a good fit to do neuroimaging research. I swear theater and academia have way too much in common and I'll be just fine. So I got the job and I moved out to DC. And so for 2 years, I did neuroimaging research looking at how our brains reorganize as a result of having strokes or seizures, particularly of interest in kids. So just like a little kind of fun plug. It used to be that if you had a seizure, you couldn't have brain surgery until you were 18. But most people, if they're going to have seizures, they start kind of before the age of 6 or 7. And they thought, well, what if we do brain surgery when they're 6 or 7 and remove the seizure foci? And our brains, as you guys might all realize, we're just much better at learning things and healing when we're kids. So this was kind of the beginning of us starting to do pediatric surgery. I absolutely loved it. One of the things I liked about it that I recommend to everyone is I got to work in an environment where I saw like 8 different professions. Like there were some people who were like just neuroimaging researchers, and there was social workers and nurses and neurologists and neuropsychologists. And it gave me an opportunity to kind of look at all of their jobs and think like, which of your jobs would I want to do? How much of my time do I want to spend doing any given task? So after a couple of years of doing research, I applied for graduate school in psychology and ended up moving out to San Diego to do UC San Diego's program to become a neuropsychologist. So I continued all my neuroimaging research, kind of more of the same. So all in all, about 10 years of doing neuroimaging research and about 7 years to get my PhD. And while I was, the last thing you have to do for your PhD is a year of, it's either called residency or internship, and you open an envelope and find out where you're moving. Now you open an email and find out where you're moving. And so I found out that I matched in San Francisco at the San Francisco VA. And I intentionally made a decision while there that I wanted to get more clinical experience. I used to say, I'm a psychologist, but I don't like emotions, because I was just doing like learning disorder assessments or traumatic brain injury assessments, all these cognitive assessments. And I'm like, you know what, I want to take advantage of this year where the only thing you're supposed to do for that year is clinical training. I finally didn't have any research to do. I could just focus on clinical training. And I'm like, I want to know a little bit more about what it's like to be a clinician treating things instead of just assessing things. And I enjoyed that year. And I then had a baby, my first son. And that was kind of my first, it was kind of the beginning of a pivot away from research. And the research environment can shift really dramatically depending upon each presidential administration and how they are designating funding for different projects. And so there was like a heyday of lots and lots of research funding. So we ended up in a situation with a lot more postdoctoral fellows than there were faculty positions. So I'm like, maybe I want to kind of pivot a little away from research. And then I was also off cycle for fellowship because I just had my son Max. And that's when I stumbled into eating disorders. So I'd gone out to lunch with some friends from grad school, and I'm like, who's hiring off cycle? And they said, Walt K. in the eating disorder department. And I'm like, why would I want to work in eating disorders? It sounds miserable. And I think that's what a lot of us were taught, right? We didn't get any training in eating disorders, even though, what did I spend 6 or 7 years becoming a psychologist? No training in eating disorders. So I started this fellowship for eating disorders, and I instantly loved it. So a couple of things that I loved is that I realized that I held the same stereotypes and beliefs as the entire public, despite me being a mental health professional. So I thought that eating disorders were a rich white girl vanity issue, just like a lot of other people think. What I quickly learned is that eating disorders are in fact a neurobiological illness. If you're not wired to have an eating disorder, you probably won't have one. But also eating disorders affect everyone. So in our clinic, we'd have 40% of people being identifying as being males. We would have people of all races and ethnicities and ages. I opened the first ever pediatric clinic for eating disorders, and that had kids as young as 6. We treated people into their 60s. And the problem that I started to see was how few people had access to evidence-based treatment for eating disorders. And maybe you guys have kind of experienced this, but like once you've seen the solution to something, it's infuriating watching that other people don't have access to the solution, right? And people would come to our clinic, we'd treat usually about 80 people at one time, and they would get better. But they would tell me that they had been in 1, 2, 3, 5 other treatment centers before they got to us. And that was time that they spent not being in school, not being on their soccer team, not being with their family. So the longer you spend ill, the less the chances that you're going to make a full recovery. So, okay. Where are we at now? Should I wait for the next question? I'm sorry, I realize I just keep on going. Should I keep on going to how we got to the company?
Just keep on going. So somewhere along the way, you were like, we now know how to fix this. We should find a way to give people access.
Exactly. So we would have, and this sounds obnoxious because it is obnoxious. We would, about half of our patients came from all over the United States and also all over the world. And we took all insurance types. But I remember this man said to me once, I am one of the richest men in the country. So interesting that he chose to say that, but it took me 3 treatment centers before I found this place for my child. So if I can't find good treatment, nobody can find good treatment. And that really hit home. And I'd already gotten to know my co-founder, Christina Safran. She'd founded Project Heal. She was really interested in the financial access issue. So she'd spent the past 10 years raising money so that people could afford to go to treatment for eating disorders. And then here I was seeing the physical access issue, that people who had really good insurance or plenty of money still ended up with in a lot of really kind of crap treatment centers. So just briefly, a little bit about what's kind of been happening in the behavioral health space in America. A lot of people have been given treatment that feels good, but not treatment that works. So if you went to your doctor because your bone broke and to get a cast, and you ended up getting like, I don't know, gangrene or a skin condition, or the bone didn't heal right, you'd go back to the doctor and you kind of figure out what's going on. But if you heard that the past 5 people who went to that doctor had the exact same thing, you might start thinking, I don't know, maybe their office isn't very clean, or maybe he doesn't really know what he's doing. You would never think that you yourself did a poor job of healing your bone, right? Like you wouldn't blame yourself for that. But in behavioral health, what we do is we give people treatment that feels good. We give people, well, in the eating disorder and substance use space, we give them horseback riding and yoga on the beach. And at these residential centers, there might be gourmet chefs. But then there's also just talking to someone who's a really good listener, who's nice. It feels good to talk to them. All of those things feel good, but they don't heal PTSD. They don't heal substance use, and they don't heal an eating disorder. So what ends up happening is people go and get treatment that feels good, and then they don't get better because they didn't get treatment that works. But instead of recognizing that the treatment was poor, in our country, we blame the person who didn't get better. They didn't want to stop drinking. They didn't want to get rid of their eating disorder. They're not trying hard enough to not be depressed. And then they keep going back to that poor treatment because they are blaming themselves. So this is kind of the overarching problem that we're seeing in behavioral health in America, and it exists in other countries too. It's not just us. But what we're trying to change is that, like, no, there's actually good treatment. And sometimes good treatment that works feels kind of crappy. So the evidence-based treatment for eating disorders involves including the family, whatever family means to them. So it used to be this idea that if you had an eating disorder, you're 15, I'm going to just talk to you and convince you to like your body and convince you to recover. We know that that doesn't work. They called it a parentendectomy. There must be something wrong with your family. We're going to take you from your family to heal you. Yeah. And that's what's still happening in 96% of cases around the US right now. That's how we're treating it. Instead, we bring the family in and we say, okay, family, we know that you didn't cause the eating disorder, but maybe you're doing things that accidentally reinforce it. So let's figure out what those things are. Let's hold our defensiveness and figure out what those are. And then also, how can we structure your home environment for recovery and to prevent relapse? That's not fun. Going to treatment with your parents stinks, right? So there's a lot of treatment that works that doesn't necessarily feel good. So wrapping it up to how we ended up founding a business. So I had been at the university for almost 10 years. I'd finally become faculty. I was on my way to become an associate professor. It was my dream. It was just what I always wanted. And then Christina approaches me and we go out to lunch and she's like, so I think we need to raise money and start a business in the private sector. And I'm like, what? Like, I love my job at the university. And she's like, so how long until you're going to leave the university? And I'm like, what? So we went and met with a bunch of heads of insurance companies, actually on my birthday. And I also ran into Lizzo that day. So clearly stars were aligned, right? I don't know Lizzo, but I like literally, I'll incorporate that in the story. So we we fly out from California to New York. We present for the heads of these 3 insurance companies and talk to them about the difficulty that we're seeing, that they're paying tons of money for treatment that doesn't work. And they're like, you know what? If you build it, we will come. Like, build the new treatment center, the new treatment program that we need. And so I remember that day before I got in the cab to go to the airport, Christina asked me, so how long until you leave the university? And I said, 2.5 years. I'll work part-time at the university and part-time, doing this startup. And she's like, okay. Now the spoiler is it took me, I think, maybe 7 more weeks before I gave notice at the university. Right. Things moved really fast. I got into a cab, got to the airport, and I was a little bit early. So I sat down and I looked up, and like right in front of me was Lizzo. And it's just like I just went, ah, just like sounds came out of my mouth. I was just so surprised to see her right next to me. Like, she's like, hi. I'm like, hi. I'm like, this is a sign from the universe. Lizzo wants me to leave the job. So then we just started building, and then we started pitching. I never thought I would go pitch to venture capitalists and tell them to give me millions of dollars for an idea. We read a book on how to do it. We read Secrets of Sand Hill Road, and then we did what the book told us. And it worked. So
any good academic would do.
Exactly. We read the book. So we went and pitched in the fall, and we raised our seed funding. And left our jobs and started building. So we've been building for a year now, and we have our first insurance contracts and our first patients, and we are in the process of closing our Series A. These are words that I didn't know. So I think maybe my biggest message to your class is it's okay to have like no idea what you're doing and to just do it anyways. I would sit in these meetings, and on the right-hand column, I would just kind of leave free, and I would just write all of the acronyms that I was hearing, just acronym after acronym after acronym. And then I would lay in bed at night and just Google all of the acronyms so that I would like kind of finally understand everything that was just talked about in the meeting. So I didn't know what a seed fund was. I didn't know what Series A meant. I didn't know what a cap table was. I knew none of these things, and not knowing them in no way has gotten in the way of us moving forward with our business. We are learning as we go. I always wanted secretly to go get my MBA. So I kind of feel like this is me kind of getting my MBA, but in a more immersive way, I guess. And in some ways costing less money. So
that's exactly right. And
so that's where we are now.
Give us the elevator pitch of the business.
Oh, great. So we are partnered with insurance companies to provide care for their patients with eating disorders. All families with eating disorders get a 5-person care team. They get a doctor who can monitor them for medical stability, also prescribe medication and do ongoing medication management, a dietitian who does meal plans and exercise prescriptions, a therapist who does both family and individual therapy, a peer mentor, so that's someone who's in recovery from an eating disorder who provides skills and support and motivation, and a family mentor. That is someone who has helped their child through an eating disorder and is now mentoring parents who are in the thick of it. So all of our families get this 5-person care team. They're all W-2 employees of Equip Health. That's something that makes us very unique from other telehealth companies. They often hire their therapists as 1099s, which means you tell me that you treat trauma, great, I'll get a patient, I'll give the patient to you, but I'm not going to be, telling you what to do or how to do your job. We actually train all 5 of them, and it's 100% virtual. We built it before COVID. We used to think that virtual was second best. Like if you can find an awesome provider face-to-face, do that. And if not virtual, we've now changed our mind. Most people with eating disorders need 3 to 4 appointments a week. It's very burdensome on a family. Also, people get better when you bring your whole village. I have 2 children now, and I rely heavily on my brother and my sister-in-law and my mom and her husband and my husband. I couldn't bring my whole village to an appointment at 2:00 on a Tuesday, 15 miles from here. Like there's no way we could coordinate all of our schedules. But when it's virtual, everyone can call in from their respective work or school and be able to participate in treatment. And we're getting people better. I think another thing that makes us unique is we're doing case rates. So we're doing value-based care with the companies and helping them treat their patients for a lot less, but have a lot better outcomes. That was a very long elevator ride. I think that was a very tall building we were just in.
Well, but that was a fantastic elevator pitch and a fantastic business. And I think the students will be thrilled to hear about all of that. And I think, the takeaway being like, business training is a great thing. There are a lot of business majors in the class, and also having areas of interest to which you take your business training, if that's what you did, or coming with an area of expertise and sort of getting the business training along the way are both totally valid ways to go solve problems. We're using IDEO's human-centered design model for their class project. So they're very used to this idea of taking the person that you're solving for and then working out from that. And you guys have certainly done that. And can't
I
wait.
love that you're thinking that way. And I like the idea too. I mean, we're brand new to venture capital, but we keep meeting a lot of, like we met a 25-year-old man selling something for women going through menopause. And I'm just like, I'm having a really hard time like hearing you explain to me menopause. Like, so I think that, we have been very fortunate, my co-founder and I, to be having the type of success that we are having on our first go round. And so we've kind of asked some of our investors, why, and they have said that like having really deep experience in the industry that you're in is just as valuable as maybe saying having all the business experience. So yeah.
Well, for the students, thanks so much for that. And on their behalf, I really thank you for the time. And you and I will talk for another second, but I'm going to go ahead and close it off for them. So class, this is this week's entrepreneur interview, and we'll have a wrap up on Friday from the individual sessions.